second part you talked about on going back to
Birth control.
family nucleus, going back to traditional family values, birth control, which 1950 kind of changed the game when that came out. Well, sometimes I see that as a test we do. Like I would assume as a scientist, I'm not a scientist, but we run a company and we'll say, let's test this comp plan to see if it works. And then all of a sudden you're like, oh, this comp plan produces terrible results. Guys, let's go back to the old comp plan. There is nothing wrong with that. When you introduce a new compensation structure or a new model or a new segment or a new show and you're like, dude, this is a terrible show we just launched. We did 10 of them already. They don't like it. Let's just cut it. We're not going to continue funding this show. What's wrong with saying this one area we were willing to be gentle with and open-minded to, guess what? It's not producing the right results. We got to go back to the principles that produce results.
So are we talking about climate change or are we talking
Second
about...
one, not climate change.
We're
Second
talking
one,
about
yes.
family
nucleus,
dynamics.
yes.
Oh, nothing's wrong with it except that it's never going to happen.
What do you mean by that?
What I mean is, prior to reliable birth control, there was a structure that was imposed on us by nature. And again, I'm not defending it as fair, but what it was coherent. And that structure came from the fact that human babies are incredibly expensive to raise. And I don't mean that financially. I mean the investment that goes into a human baby is like no other creature. What that means is that it requires more than one person to raise one, which then means that a woman would be crazy if she had a choice to choose to produce an offspring that she would have to raise alone if she had the option to raise it with a partner. Okay? So it is that extreme cost which falls initially entirely on women that they can then redistribute with a partner. That cost drives the system. On the flip side of that, you have the fact that sex for men is one of the, maybe it is the most potent motivator in the universe. There is nothing that tops it. And so, in a world where women guard their reproductive capacity carefully because they do not want to accidentally produce a child for which they will be fully responsible for raising it, men have to live up to whatever standard women set in order to be worthy of a sexual relationship, which is the ultimate goal of the evolutionary exercise. That was a coherent world. Not fair, but coherent. You introduce birth control, in which sex and reproduction are now technologically separated from each other, and that logic no longer works. Now, it took decades for it to fully break down, but we are at the point where this logic has now given way, and young people do not inherently see the logic of finding a partner. They don't inherently see the logic of producing offspring, and while not having a partner and not producing offspring are valid choices, I would defend people's right to make those choices, the degree to which people have lost sight of why they might want to do those things should be alarming to us.
So is your position pro-choice, pro-life? Is that what you're saying as your second one, to make it a little bit more specific for the audience?
I'm not really advocating for a solution here. We could talk about what solutions might be.
No. The question I'm asking is, like when I said, what do conservatives need to do to get your vote? And you said number one is sustainability, the fact that they don't even want to give the, where I said to you, I think the left is more certain that there's climate change. The right is just saying, let's be skeptical and let's be open to the fact that maybe there isn't. Maybe this is a natural cycle. The second one you said, how, 1950, the birth control. So is your second one saying that the right is too convinced that it has to be pro-life where it's pro-choice?
This is a funny issue. I have known since I started thinking about it decades ago, that there was vastly more agreement on the issue of choice than we acknowledge, that our discussion has become extremely polarized. But most people fall out in a camp that believes there is some right to terminate a pregnancy very early while we are talking about something that is has certainly the potential to become a human but does not have the characteristics of a human yet. And people grow increasingly uncomfortable the closer we get to the moment of birth. That's where almost all of us are. Now, there's a group of people who has a religious perspective that I respect, which says you're interfering in a divine process. Something has decided to produce a child, and you are deciding to override it. And that is the reason that a certain brand of religious conservative does not see any room for terminating a pregnancy. But that is a small fraction of the population. Most of us believe there is some right to that technology, and that right grows less and less compelling the closer we get to the moment of birth.
Okay.
So, by and large, I don't need religious conservatives to give up their commitment to their understanding of how the universe works. And frankly, I think the bias that this is a sobering decision is the right one, for sure. But, how should society be governed? Well, it should be governed approximately where we all fall out. We're not overly comfortable with this process, but we believe that it has to exist in some form for lots of reasons.